on there.
Hey, friend.
Hey, friend. It is a beautiful Tuesday today. That's why we're sitting outside.
Isn't it gorgeous?
It is gorgeous.
This
We
weather.
found this cute little place to sit too
This is so pretty.
before we go have a little lunch together.
That's right. We can do a little chat.
Yep. We wanted to share a couple of things. We get together, Michael and I, we get together and we talk about hot topics of that parents with children with disabilities are talking about and struggling with. And so we thought, why not record us talking about some of this stuff? It might be helpful.
Agree. We have some good dialogue to share, and the phone rings with questions. And so hopefully this might help somebody along the way. Plus, we get together, and that's always a good time.
We do. We laugh a lot too, right?
It's good to laugh,
It
right?
is. All right. Well, one of the things that I'll just start out, Michael Ann,
Okay.
and one of the things that I have been seeing posted in a lot of the Facebook groups, and then I've had this question asked by some clients, and even some I've had this happen even with schools that are unsure of this rule, but we've had several conversations about how this year there are schools that are releasing their population of special ed students quite a bit earlier than their general population. And so the concern I have is that if there's a group of children in a special ed classroom and that classroom is being picked up early by the bus or something like that, that means that in my mind, the words I hear from my training with TEA is those children are not getting what's called a commensurate school day that as the typically developing children are getting. Are you hearing much about that?
I am, and I have seen parents voice their concerns. And the interesting thing we talked about recently, you and I, is that parents are really split. Some parents want to get out of that bus line and send my child 20 minutes early. I'm good. And then other parents aren't okay with it, and they want them to have bell to bell, which is understandable because they are students or gen ed students first, no matter if they have an IEP. And so I know you and I have talked about that. What are you hearing? And I think it's very individual with families. But I think at the end of the day, what has triggered some parents to not be on board is that they're not being given the option, or there isn't a discussion. They're being told this is your new pickup time. And I think that's where it's a slippery slope. Wouldn't you
I
agree?
do. And that is
Mhm.
what you just said is so critical for everything, not just this topic, which is
Mhm.
the school needs to communicate with you as the parent. They need to discuss things with you. I just had a conversation this morning with a past client who said, am I right about wanting to ask this question? And I said,
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
could see why the school would want to do it the way you're saying,
Mhm.
that they're wanting to do it. But the problem is they haven't explained it to you.
Mhm.
So I'm not
Mhm.
saying you're right or they're right. I'm saying you don't understand. And therefore, it is their responsibility
Mhm.
to really show you, maybe research why they want to do it
Mhm.
that way,
Mhm.
or district policy that's written down that that's why they want to do it that way.
Mhm.
It's oftentimes not that it's a black and white, this is right, this is wrong. It's we need to have a discussion about it.
Mhm.
And so that's when you would ask for an ARD meeting if you
Mhm.
really need to discuss it and get it in
Right.
writing.
I agree. And I think that it has a lot of moving parts. The other piece of that is that parents will say, oftentimes it's not just one child they're picking up, they have siblings. So that if you have a first grader that has an IEP and they're being dismissed 20 minutes early,
Mhm.
the parent logistically is not going to pull through the line and then want to come back in for, because you're actually asking them to pull potentially multiple siblings early. And so it's that domino effect of now my siblings are going to be missing the end. And, and I get it. A lot of classrooms are just doing that last minute pickup. And they're, a lot of my teacher friends are saying, hey, that last bit of time, we're just getting the room cleaned up. That's still coming from an executive function lens, which I'm personally passionate about. That is practice time for our students that really sometimes struggle greatly with those skills, and they need that practice and they're missing that. And so, that's one thing, parents could question. And that I know the dialogue with schools and teachers, with parents are, need to include all of these moving parts. And so that's what comes to mind when, parents are bringing that up. It has a lot of layers.
It does. I will tell you, there is one. I just said there's no absolutes, but there are a few. So I'm going to give you a situation that's absolutely a no-go if this is happening. And I'm going to tell you that I personally experienced this in leadership in a large district in this area. And it's because we didn't know. And so oftentimes school districts just don't know some of these rules because they've never been told or because they've not researched it deeply. And so I will give you a personal example. Years and years ago, I was in a district where we had a situation where we were growing like crazy. Our schools were very overpopulated, lots of numbers in the school. And just like everything else, transportation was struggling. They were struggling with how many buses they had, how many drivers they had, and how they could stack the kids in the routes to get them home in a reasonable amount of time. And one of the decisions the district made, and as special ed department, we didn't even know that this decision had been made until we found out later because TEA started knocking on our door. But we found out that the bus barn decided to get all the kids that were self-contained classrooms and have a bus come 45 minutes earlier than all the other kids were going to be dismissed so that they could get those kids to their homes and use that bus again to come back and pick up another group of kids. Okay, logically, that sounds reasonable, right? Logically. The problem is they broke the law of commensurate school day, which means they were basically, I hate to use the word, but they were discriminating against a group of children with disabilities to shorten their school day. And so that is a no-go, right? That is absolutely, from personal experience, that cannot happen. And the school district will get a direct letter from TEA if they found out that's happening. So that's an example of when it can't happen, right?
Right.
Yeah.
We had a parent that was had reached out just to a community group and said, is this happening to anyone else? And it was the flip side. It was the before school, and her child was being picked up so early. I'm sorry, let me back up. So late that she was missing breakfast and the first 15 minutes of class because her route was actually placed on the end of I guess all of the trips. And so they were coming back to get her, and the parent called the bus leadership, and they said, this is just how it is. You're just going to have to deal with it. And so that just is not going to float. That's not okay. And I think sometimes the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing in leadership. And so sometimes it just does take that meeting to sit down and say, this is actually what's happening. And for special education leadership to hear what's happening and make some changes. And so I just encourage parents, just, communicate. I encourage schools to communicate and fact find what is going on, and looking through the lens of what the law says, are we following that? And, schools aren't perfect. They're going to make mistakes. But a lot of times what I have found as an advocate is that, more often than not, I think schools want to get it right if you have good leadership in there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And they don't want to fight parents. Now, I know there will be people that say that's not my experience, but, typically I like to give credit and,
benefit of the doubt,
right? And come in and assume competence and collaboration to come in and work through sometimes complex and complicated situations that don't seem like maybe they've got a clear solution. So I think things can be worked out.
I did too. And here's the thing too, is that special education is a whole different set of expectations, rules. It plays by a totally different rule set, like law set. Like it is such a deep, complicated layer on top of general education. And if some district leadership that are making policy or something and not really talking to maybe special ed leaders about some of that policy before it gets put in place, that happens sometimes in large districts, It's not that they're trying to do anything wrong, like Michael Ann's saying. They don't know the subtleties and details of special ed procedure and law, and the result of lots of years of litigation that has caused policy to be built under special ed. And so they just don't know those things. They're not trying to do anything wrong. I agree. I think that they don't know. And when we point it out to them and we show them in black and white and the reasoning, like I was saying earlier, you discuss it with them, you give the reasons, the research, the background, the law, 90% of the time they're going to be like, oh, I didn't know that. And they're going to be able to put that policy in place. And I'm talking about like up higher in the district leadership. A lot of times when you're dealing with campus staff, they just know what they know, and they just know to follow procedure. And if this is the procedure they've been told, then they're going to stick to it and follow it. So sometimes you do have to elevate it a little bit, but you can do it in a collaborative way. The other thing it was on my mind when you were talking about that, is that anytime you are, just so you guys know this, anytime that you're like, okay, I heard what Darby and Michael Ann said about commensurate school day. I didn't even know that word till today. Like that's just an educational word that people just don't use all the time. And so if you didn't know that word till today and you're thinking, what else do I not know? You know what? Jump on a consultation call with one of us, and we will be happy to listen and help you with next steps. And I find that oftentimes just in one consultation, I can get people going in the right direction. And they don't have to pay for a full like hours of advocacy or anything. I can kind of just get them going the right direction. They just need terms. They need some language to use. They need a little bit of foundational understanding. And so that's an option if you're just needing to understand a little bit.
Sometimes a family that I might have provided some support for years ago might reach out and say, we're having a little bump in the road. What is the best way to approach this? And I might send a template email or talk through the issue, and then we're kind of off and going. I think sometimes parents just like that check-in to say, am I going in the right direction? You know, is this what I think? And sometimes it's just that little bit of encouragement. So yeah, I agree with that. Sometimes we just all need that a little bit.
So I'm going to change topic. Okay.
Do it.
I had a very kind of concerning conversation with a person here in the last week or so who told me, she's an employee of a district. She told me that her district had started a new policy. They have a new leadership person. New policies happen when you get new leadership. And her understanding, and maybe she misunderstood. She admitted, maybe I misunderstood, but her understanding is that the policy for the whole district was they would no longer write objectives under goals for any goals.
Interesting.
Isn't that strange?
Yeah.
That hit me very strangely.
I wonder what their reasoning was.
You know, I think, again, it's not understanding the subtleties of special education, maybe. And if you make a policy like that, you have taken the individual out of IEP.
Agree.
It no longer becomes an ARD committee decision of how a child's goal needs to be broken down and addressed over time.
Because that's what objectives are. It's breaking down that bigger goal into smaller steps. And I think that that's helpful not only in the classroom for teachers to look at that bigger goal and approach it incrementally with a student. It gives the student the opportunity to build prerequisite skills a bit towards that bigger goal. And that's interesting.
So what's a goal? Because there are some. What's a goal, Michael Ann, that you think is appropriate to not have objectives?
To not have objectives?
Because there are some.
Sometimes I don't see as many objectives if we're looking at social skills, for example. That's an area that I don't oftentimes see. I do see some, in there.
Kind of depends.
It kind of depends, but I see a lot of objectives in math.
Yes.
It really builds on itself.
For sure.
I see a lot of objectives in, ELAR. That's an area that builds.
English language arts.
English language arts.
Just in case. Just in case.
I think that you have to be careful, and maybe this goes back to a training thing too. You don't want to have a goal and have 10 objectives
Oh, no,
necessarily. I don't think that's
it's not
necessarily going
even
to achieve the
doable. Yeah,
goal.
it's not
Like maybe
doable.
some districts have inherited some IEPs that are just almost impossible to track because they
Mhm.
have too many moving parts like that. So I think you have to look carefully at what objectives are necessary. And again, that's a team decision. It's not going to be just sometimes you just throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's an old
It,
thing.
it is,
You
and
remember
it's
that?
true.
We're old
Absolutely.
enough to
Yeah, we
remember
are.
that.
That
So
is
you
a
have to be
true.
careful.
Yeah, so I agree about math. So here's a perfect example is that if a child, and this is just off the cuff, so let's see how accurate I can be. If a child has a disability area in the area of math calculation,
Mhm.
and they really need to understand like fact families, like how a fact family works with addition, multiplication, division, subtraction, like how all that a
Mhm.
group of numbers interacts in those ways. And that is the big goal. The goal is for them to understand a appropriate level at their level of how a group of numbers interacts in totality with a math calculation. Maybe the goal is something like that. It makes perfect sense that you would break down objectives into the separate ways you do the computation. That you would have an objective for subtraction, an objective for addition, division, and multiplication. And the reason you would need the objectives in that case is because children often progress at different rates depending on the
Mhm.
function, right?
Mhm.
It depends on which computation tool they're using that they will progress at a different rate. I mean, in general, not always, but in general, kids tend to be a little slower with understanding division.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so it may be that that goal is achieved except for division. And then you can take that objective that wasn't achieved within the annual year and then turn that into a new goal that just really targets division. But if you hadn't had the breakdown of objectives and taken the
Mhm.
data separately over the course of the year,
Mhm.
it would have been really hard. And it also would have been hard until you had the goal with the objectives. If you had just created 4 goals,
Mhm. Mhm.
then we're talking about having, again, back to like 10, 15
Mhm.
goals. Well,
Mhm.
that's too hard to implement. Like
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
something that it streamlines the process. It's a benefit to the teachers and the
Mhm.
district too to do it that way.
Mhm.
So I don't, is that tracking?
Yeah, and I want to you made me think of something.
Okay.
This is something that came up a lot over the past couple of years where when I review IEPs and it has to do with tracking and it has to do with those knowing where a student is, in relation to making progress with their IEP goals or their objectives. A lot of times teachers will, when they're sharing that data at the 9-week IEP reporting period, it will just say progressing. Um, and a parent, you get into a dialogue and they don't know where their child is functioning, literally. And so we'll ask the school because you go back and look at the goal and it'll say with, for example, 70% accuracy. Where on that continuum are we progressing? Are we at 10%? The
Right.
goal was just written. Are
Right.
we at, halfway through the year? Are we close
It needs
to
specificity, right?
needs
Like it needs the,
specificity?
yeah,
That's a
it
great,
needs it.
I love that.
Mhm.
And so parents just won't know. And then I think what really is kind of the gut punch, if you will, to a parent, you get to that ARD meeting here in Texas, my IEP clients from Oklahoma. You don't call it
We call it art.
ARD,
Only Texas, we call it
what's
art.
an ARD?
Yeah.
So you get to that meeting and all of a sudden, you see those goals back on there for 2 years, for 3 years. And I review this paper, these documents, this paperwork, and the goal that they had in second grade is still on there for, fourth grade. And it's like, what happened? The parents are like, we just keep seeing these goals come back. And we dig in there to see, where were they? What did that progress look like in the history of the student? And there's no percentages, there's no documentation of how that child has progressed. And so, one of the things I share with my clients is, go look to see how the goal was written. Are they measuring in trials? Are they measuring in percentages? Ask for that. And so when we get into those meetings, we will bring that up in that meeting to the teacher and say, how are you going to be collecting this data? And so we want to hear from that teacher at that meeting when that IEP is written, to find out how and how often are they going to be collecting. So we really want to have a lot of clarity with that.
Absolutely.
So I don't know if you're hearing some of that feedback.
I
Just
am.
child's performing and progressing.
Well, again,
important.
and it's it benefits the school and the school district and the teachers to do it that way. And
Mhm.
here's why, is because if I'm sitting at that ARD or IEP table with a client and I am helping them navigate that we cannot track what kind of progress has occurred in a year or 2 years. If we take a baseline assessment and the child has not made any significant progress in that period of time, as a person representing that family, I'm going to ask for compensatory services from the school because the child hasn't made progress. And so
for our friends that don't know what that means.
Well, yeah, let's explain that. Compensatory services is basically the way that a school district is responsible to make up when a child does not progress on their goals. When you have set a goal, that's why it's super important when a child isn't progressing at the right percentage or rate on a goal. It's really important that a review ARD be called because they may have to reset that goal. They may have to rewrite that goal because it wasn't an appropriate goal and the child's not going to make enough progress. And if they do that, that's fine. They've caught their error and they come back and they rewrite the goal and they figure out what's the most appropriate target that we need to have right now. That's fine. And that's, they're doing the right thing. They're taking accountability. If they let something like that go on for a full school year or 2 years, I've seen it for 2 years before. Just recently, I saw a situation with the 11th grade young lady who had no significant progress in math for 2 years. And the school district ended up agreeing to quite a bit of compensatory services in the form of specialized tutoring in the summer because that child was not given the right intervention, the right IEP for 2 years. And it was evident because when she was tested, she had not made progress in those math concepts. So compensatory services means that you have to give additional services on top of the IEP if progress hasn't been made and it hasn't been addressed.
So I want to just kind of bump into that since we're talking about compensatory services. My experience in multiple school districts, when you bring it to the attention of the district, if a child has not been serviced, we'll say, for example, related services, the speech teacher left in December, for example, and maybe they weren't able to get consistent services throughout the spring semester. And the parent is aware, the school is aware. When you bring that to their attention that they need to come back and service those minutes, we've not had one district say we're not going to do it. So I know that is a big hot topic with parents when that happens. And I think with the climate that we have right now, sometimes teachers do leave their contracts in the middle of the year. It happens.
And other service providers.
And other service providers. Related service, OT, PT, speech.
And even the speech. Yeah, I've
Right,
had a lot of speech teachers.
But I've never, not one time, had a school say we're not going to make it up. So now, does the parent sometimes have to say, hey, let's meet, let's come in and meet,
Draw it to their attention.
and brought it to their attention.
Yeah.
But we've always had a good collaboration with the school coming back saying we are going to make up these services. So I did want to just kind of point that out because that seems like it's happening more and more. The other thing with talking about IEPs and start times, how long does an IEP actually, how long is that in place for a student? So this has actually been coming up on a lot of groups where parents are saying, I don't think my child's IEP has the services have started. And here we are a couple of weeks into school. So I have seen schools that actually write this IEP is going to start and they'll put the date in there and it gives them a little bit of time at the beginning of the year to start maybe speech. But that doesn't mean other services aren't supposed to be happening. But sometimes speech will Is that your experience too, where they'll write it a little bit after school starts?
Sometimes,
But you have to go look.
where I see it the most is when you have a child that's having that struggles with some transitions and stuff, and before they start their full schedule, they'll put in the IP that they have a couple of weeks to stay in a class. Like, you know what I mean?
If it's written.
If it's written, that's okay.
But if it's not written, it should be starting.
Yes.
And so I do see a lot of kind of head scratching with parents and concern. Why haven't they been going to relate? Go and look and see what the date is. If the date, if there's not a specific alternate start time for that service, it should be happening.
Yes.
But I have seen where sometimes speech will write in that they'll have a little delay before, after the start of school. But if it's not written in, it should be starting.
Well, and I was talking to a couple of clients like on the 4th day of school this year, and they were calling me because they were already concerned that maybe inclusionary support hadn't started, or their child hadn't been pulled for OT yet. They were asking me those questions. And, I'm a person that's like, yes, starting a school year is hard on the school. It can be very challenging to build schedules and figure all that out. Absolutely. I think it is fine to give the school a few days grace, like 2 or 3 days of grace. They need a little time to figure out all the working components that it requires, and it is quite complicated. And so give them a little grace. But if you see that your child, especially if it's happening more than 1 year in a row, if you're seeing your child not starting to get their related services or even their full schedule within, for sure, 2 weeks, if they are missing that many days, then that could be another request for compensatory services because the IEP was not implemented in the timeline that it should have been.
Which kind of leads me into something that's always a topic where I feel like parents reach out and say, I don't know that my child is getting their accommodations. And being in this public school, charter school, private school, homeschool arenas, over the past 35 years, I understand timelines, and I understand services, and I understand that sometimes those things kind of hit a wall. Like you were saying, Darby, couple days grace if things aren't happening, or if there's like a long-term sub, that even though there's a long-term sub, it still needs to happen. And we've asked for specific training for those long-term subs. Here in our local larger school districts, it seemed to happen a lot in the past couple of years. We specifically asked for an ARD meeting, went back to meeting and asked for training for those long-term, because we knew they were going to be there. I think one of my clients had 3 long-term subs over the course of an entire year. So we had to kind of stay on and say, hey, we do need this person to also have this training because our students were not receiving their accommodations. And those types of things happen because people are people and transitions change in adult lives. But as a parent, if you do have that ongoing concern, that's something I know you have a lot of conversations too with that. You can ask for accommodation tracking. If it's in the classroom and you feel like there could be some other nuances going on. Maybe the student doesn't need that accommodation anymore. And we're going to ask for the data to show we just don't need it. But if it's something that's needed, that's written in, or that's not happening, we want to, again, ask for that accommodation tracking so that we can see. And that's what I share with leadership and parents is, at the end of the day, if we're able to roll off some of these accommodations, that's the goal. We don't want to be loaded down with all of these accommodations if they're not needed.
And
if they're showing growth, and if they're able to access their education in a way that shows that they're able to make meaningful progress, let's do it. We all want that. So let's roll them off if we don't need them, but we have to base those decisions on that data. And so we might ask for that data and say, we want it from the beginning of school until now. This might be October, could be February. So I know that with my daughter teaching, one of the things that when she went into public education, I really emphasized to her is always, make time to keep that, so that if you get an email that says we need to consider this, you push a button and it's done and it's there. And that you are tracking that every single child that has that need. And she kept great records. But I think that sometimes teachers may not know how to keep that up. I know I asked for it at one particular district and they sent the syllabus. And I'm like, well, maybe they just haven't been trained.
Yeah.
That was like, no,
No,
that's not what we're looking
no.
for. And so we did, you can ask during that ARD meeting that teachers receive specific training in different areas of the IEP. And if you have concerns that teachers don't know how to track data, I mean, that's an area that you can ask as a parent that they do receive that training, and they probably, I know they have a lot on their plate, but they might appreciate too, just the district giving that little bit of extra training so that they,
Oh, I think teachers
you
really
know,
do want the training. Yeah,
yeah,
and even subs, they want the training. They don't know what to ask for.
yeah.
Just like the reason we're doing this little video today and trying to share this is because
Lunch and
parents,
learn.
yeah, lunch and learn, because by the way, my son started to growl, so
We're gonna have to.
we're going to wrap it up in just a minute. But I wanted just a couple things I want to add on there is, first of all, I want to just share there are a lot of subs for our kids.
Hmm.
And if you have a sub for a special education teacher role in your school and that sub is not special ed certified, that is a problem. But there is a way to address that temporarily while they're working on getting someone hired with that appropriate certification. What I have seen is that you may have a sub that's not special ed certified serving a child in a special ed classroom or in inclusion or something like that, but you have a special ed teacher that has the appropriate certification who is doing the monitoring, who is making sure that initial instruction's done correctly, that the right accommodate, like they're doing the special ed pieces alongside that sub. That is how it should be done while they're waiting to get someone hired.
Now, as a parent, because this has come up in a couple of conversations, we hit that topic and explain that scenario. As a parent, you can say, what does that look like? How are they helping come alongside you? How are they helping with the monitoring and the oversight? You can ask that question, and that is definitely an
Definitely.
area of conversation.
Yeah.
Like if you
How
don't
much-
have that
yeah.
understanding, how much
How
time
much time the
and
special ed
support.
certified teacher's spending with my child, even if a sub has to do some of the support. Like those are good questions. And again, we want to, I know Michael Ann feels this way too. We want to help parents and school districts come together in collaboration and figure this out so that so that the parent feels trust and feels confident that things are going well and that it's going to be taken care of, and that the district feels like they have the breathability to work through the issue too. And those things can occur. It just has to have that open dialogue, which is where we started. And there are things that the district does need to be held accountable for. But like Michael is saying, I would say most of the time when you show them why you are asking for what you're asking and that it's a reasonable ask, they do work with us.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
And I've even heard, and I don't ever jump into due process or encourage parents go straight to that. There's so much conversation that can happen in there. But one thing I've heard time after time after time is when you get before a due process scenario, one of the things that they look at and they ask is the parent being reasonable?
Absolutely.
Is the school being reasonable?
Yes.
And so that word just resonates in the back of my head all the time is, what have we done? What kind of dialogue and conversations and meetings have we had? And are we being reasonable on both sides of the table and coming together with collaboration? And they look at tone and they look at all of those things. And it's important that you keep that dialogue open and
I was trained,
positive collaboration.
I was trained that way in all my years in special education administration. We had very consistent regular trainings from special education attorneys. And what you just said, they said every time. They said they said it's called the rule of reasonableness.
Okay.
And that when you have anything in writing, mainly, because everything, only what's in writing pretty much, right? So in writing or in recordings, in the minutes, in parent statements, in district communications, who's ever communicating, if that is in the record, they absolutely follow the rule of reasonableness. Who is being reasonable?
Yeah, I've always heard that too. And I think it's reasonable to wrap this up and go enjoy our lunch together.
I agree. I agree. But let's do it again.
Let's do it.
It was
meet
fun.
back here.
Okay, bye.
All right.